I remember the first time I saw my face plastered all over the office walls, in glossy brochures, on the website, even in the elevator lobby. And yet the moment I smiled at it, I felt invisible. They said, "We are diverse." They didn't say, "We see you, Brianna." I walked past that huge poster of myself that morning, my coffee in hand, and I had to force the corners of my mouth up into a polite grin while my stomach knotted tight. It was Black History Month, and I was supposed to feel honored, proud. But all I could feel was the weight of being a symbol, a token, a checkbox on some executive's diversity spreadsheet. My office was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights above like a metronome counting every second I had spent proving myself, every microaggression I had swallowed, every idea I had offered and watched vanish into the ether while they smiled and said, "Interesting, let's circle back next quarter." I had learned early how to survive in this world, how to laugh politely at the jokes that weren't funny, how to answer with a calm voice when someone interrupted me mid-sentence, how to navigate a room full of people who saw my skin before they saw my brain. That morning, as I passed the reception desk, someone asked if I was proud to see myself representing the company. Their tone was cheerful, genuine, unthinking. I nodded. I lied. Proud doesn't cover it. Proud implies ownership. But I hadn't signed a contract giving them my soul. I hadn't agreed to let them profit off my identity while keeping me out of the boardroom. I had spent years learning the language of compliance, of politeness, of staying under the radar until someone noticed me, only to realize that noticing me didn't mean valuing me. Meetings were a battlefield. I had learned to speak softly but sharply, to plant seeds of ideas and watch as others harvested them, to nod while my mind raced with strategies to get my voice heard without triggering the alarm. And yet, even with all that strategy, I still got the calls from HR reminding me to remember my place and stay professional. Professional? Funny word. They meant agreeable, compliant, non-threatening, invisible. I poured myself another cup of coffee that morning, staring at my reflection in the mug, seeing the face that everyone else could claim as their poster child while I still had to fight for a seat at the table. I thought about the mentoring programs I had pitched, the budgets I had drafted, the ideas to actually support Black employees beyond photo shoots. They had smiled, said it was a nice initiative, and then placed it in the nice-to-have, low-priority pile where it would quietly collect dust. I laughed bitterly. That's when the first spark of something dangerous flickered, the thought that maybe, just maybe, if they wanted me to be their image, I could also be their voice, unfiltered, untamed. Walking through the office, I noticed the subtle things, the whispers when I passed, the helpful suggestions that were really veiled instructions to stay in my lane. The way the intern, a young Black woman, had to lower her voice when she said hello to me, as if any attention to me could get her in trouble. That's when I realized I was not alone in this. I had inherited a silent network of eyes watching, ears listening, people who knew all too well the price of visibility and the cost of being ignored. And for the first time, I felt a rush of power, not from the corporate approval I had never earned, but from the understanding that I could act without asking permission. By mid-morning, the email came. Subject line: Brianna Cole, Project Update. I opened it. And just like that, a professional life I had built, painstakingly, carefully, invisibly, was reduced to a sentence. We regret to inform you your position has been eliminated due to restructuring. My eyes darted back to the brochure on the wall, to the smiling face they had chosen for Diversity Month. That smile was mine, but the acknowledgement of my work, my time, my humanity, gone. I felt the quiet fury rise, simmering. They wanted my image, my likeness, my approval, but not my reality. They wanted me in the frame, not in the room. I sat down at my desk, hands trembling, and I thought about the countless hours I had spent polishing my emails, perfecting pitches, attending meetings that never ended, sitting through seminars where I was the only Black professional in the room, smiling and nodding while my ideas were minimized. And yet, here I was, dismissed without a moment's hesitation. And I knew, deep in that hot, tight knot in my chest, that my story wasn't going to end here. I had learned too much, endured too much, to simply walk away. I thought about my community, the Black professional network I leaned on, the mentors who had shared their stories, who had told me, "Your voice is your power. Never let them take it." And in that quiet, fluorescent-lit office, a plan began to take shape. It was not a plan of revenge in the petty sense. It was a plan of exposure, of clarity, of turning the mirror back on the company that tried to profit off my identity without ever seeing me. I realized that if I played by their rules, I would lose every time. If I acted smart, decisively, I could win on my terms, and the world would watch. By the time the sun hit the high-rise windows, casting long stripes across the floor, I was no longer the smiling face on the brochure. I was Brianna Cole, strategist, survivor, voice of a community too often silenced. And as I walked past the lobby one last time before leaving the office that morning, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. Not over them, not over their fake diversity slogans, but over me. My image, my story, my voice. And for the first time, I smiled not for them, but for myself. Would you walk away or fight back? Tell me in the comments. Sevens! I remember walking into that morning meeting, my heels clicking against the polished floor, my laptop tucked under my arm, my heart racing but my face calm. The calm of someone who has learned to survive in a room where your words are often invisible. The room smelled like freshly brewed coffee and corporate ambition, a smell I knew all too well. I glanced around at the team, everyone smiling politely, nodding, pretending to listen, and I knew immediately what this meeting was going to be. Performative. Another session of diversity and inclusion, where my face could be everywhere, and my voice nowhere. I cleared my throat and started, "I'd like to propose a mentoring initiative for our Black employees. We can allocate some budget, maybe launch workshops, pair junior staff with senior mentors." I let it hang in the air, watching the reactions. A pause, then the polite nods, the carefully neutral faces. And the first comment came from Matthew, our VP, a tall man with perfectly combed hair and a smile that never touched his eyes. "Brianna, that's an interesting idea, but let's focus on the visuals for this quarter. We'll circle back to programs next year." Devins, "Interesting idea. Next year." I felt the heat rising in my chest, a familiar burn of frustration and disbelief. It wasn't that the idea was rejected, it was that it was ignored, minimized, made convenient to forget. But I stayed calm. I smiled, nodded, and jotted down notes, while my mind was already plotting how to make them see the truth anyway. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk and found an email waiting. Subject line: "Congratulations on representing the campaign." I clicked it. The message was full of cheerful platitudes. "Your smile embodies our commitment to diversity. We are proud to feature you as the face of the campaign. Proud. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then paused. I wanted to reply, "Thanks, but you're celebrating a face, not the work, not the person behind it." I didn't. Instead, I saved the email in a folder I named Performative BS and took a deep breath. Across the office, whispers followed me. I could feel the eyes of my fellow Black colleagues, subtle nods, brief smiles. We knew. We all knew. The brochures, the billboards, the carefully curated social media posts, they were proof that the company wanted the optics of diversity without the work, without the risk, without real inclusion. And yet, they expected me to grin and nod, to be happy with being a symbol, to pretend that it was enough. I spent the rest of the morning drafting an internal proposal, not for them to approve, but for myself. Every bullet point, every projection, every statistic meticulously researched. I didn't want to just pitch programs. I wanted to create undeniable evidence that they were failing. I wanted to document the disconnect between image and reality, between the smiling face on the brochure and the ignored employee in the room. Then came the casual hallway comment. A junior colleague, a Black woman just starting, whispered as I passed, "They love having you on the poster, but don't expect them to listen in meetings." I nodded. My smile stayed in place, polite, composed, but inside, the fire ignited. That whisper was my confirmation. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. And if I wanted to change anything, I had to act smart, act decisively, and act in a way that they couldn't ignore. Lunch was another performance. I sat in the cafeteria, colleagues chatting about weekend plans, sports, irrelevant office gossip. I opened my laptop, pulled up the campaign materials, and studied them. Every photo, every tagline, every smiling face was carefully curated, but hollow. They wanted to look progressive without being accountable. And the more I studied, the more my plan crystallized. It wasn't about confrontation. It wasn't about shouting. It was about strategic exposure, about using their own obsession with image against them. I could be polite, I could be professional, but I could also force them to see the truth in a way they couldn't hide from. By mid-afternoon, I had drafted a report highlighting all the gaps: programs promised but never funded, mentorships suggested but never implemented, representation in images versus reality in decision-making. I sent a discreet copy to a few trusted colleagues, the ones who had been my allies silently for years. Their responses came back almost instantly. Nods, emojis, quiet words of encouragement. We all knew what was coming. I didn't have to scream for validation. I had the quiet power of preparation and evidence. And then, the afternoon meeting with Matthew and HR. They wanted updates on the campaign launch. I smiled, professional, composed. "Everything is going smoothly," I said. And in my mind, I was already 3 steps ahead. I had my evidence, my allies, my strategy. The smiles around the table couldn't mask the truth. I had learned that they feared confrontation, but couldn't escape accountability when faced with clarity, logic, and undeniable truth. By the time I left the office that day, I felt the familiar weight of being invisible lift just a fraction. I knew the next moves would be critical, that each step had to be calculated, intentional, and bold. But more than that, I knew that the veneer of diversity could be pierced. I could expose it without losing myself. I could take control without violence, without malice, with nothing but intelligence, patience, and precision. And for the first time in months, the feeling of power, real, grounded, unstoppable, coursed through me. Walking past the campaign posters that evening, I didn't just see a smiling Black woman. I saw opportunity. I saw leverage. I saw the thin line between optics and reality. And I smiled, not because they approved, not because they appreciated, but because I knew the story was mine to tell, and I would tell it on my terms. Be honest. What would you do if it was you sitting in that room? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear you. Sevens. Thought I had prepared for every scenario. I thought I had anticipated every subtle dismissal, every polite brush-off, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. But nothing could have prepared me for that email. Subject line: Organizational update. Your role. My heart skipped a beat. My fingers froze mid-scroll. And there it was, plain and final. Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. No explanation, no acknowledgement of my contributions, no hint that my face had been the face of the company's diversity campaign for months. Just a line of text, sterile and cold. I stared at it, coffee forgotten, the hum of fluorescent lights now deafening. My poster self grinned at me from across the lobby, glowing under the artificial light. They had wanted me in every frame but never in the boardroom. Every strategy I had built, every late night spent crafting presentations that no one read, every mentoring initiative shelved without reason, all gone in a sentence. My blood boiled quietly, a slow, deliberate heat. This was not just about a job. This was about respect, recognition, visibility. They had stripped it away. I didn't react immediately. I didn't storm HR or the VP's office. I had learned the art of patience, of observation, of calculated response. I sat back, closed my eyes, and let the silence stretch, feeling the shock, the sting, the betrayal. Around me, the office buzzed with normalcy. People chatted about lunch plans, deadlines, petty gossip, completely unaware of the seismic shift under my skin. That's when I noticed the glances, subtle, fleeting, from colleagues who, like me, had felt the invisible weight of being Black in a space designed to ignore us. Their eyes said it all. We see you. We know. And in that moment, I realized my story was no longer just mine. I thought of the small victories, the whispered nods from allies, the quiet acknowledgments from peers who had shared my journey. They had been watching, waiting, ready to act when the time was right. And now, the time was right. Not to retaliate out of anger, but to reclaim what they had tried to erase. My voice, my visibility, my truth. Walking through the office that afternoon, I passed by the posters. My face, smiling, pristine, immortalized as a symbol of diversity. I looked at it long and hard. It was beautiful, yes, but hollow. They wanted optics, not action. They wanted a photo, not accountability. And I knew that while they held my image, they did not hold my story. That power was mine to wield. HR called me into a small, beige room. The smell of carpet and disinfectant, the low hum of the air conditioning, it all felt staged, rehearsed. "Brianna, we understand this is difficult," they said, as if sympathy could undo the erasure. I nodded, voice calm, measured. Yes, I understand. On the surface, polite. Beneath it, a storm. Every slight, every microaggression, Every moment I had been silenced, cataloged meticulously in my mind, ready to fuel my next move. I left the meeting quietly. No outburst. No tears. Just a controlled, deliberate march back to my desk. I checked my computer. Every account, every tool I had access to, still mine. Still mine. And in that realization, a plan began to form. They had underestimated me. They had thought a dismissal could contain me, silence me, reduce me to a number on a spreadsheet. But they had made a fatal error. They had left the key in my hand. That evening, as I packed my things, I looked around the office, scanning the space for familiar faces. Subtle nods, brief eye contact from colleagues who had lived through the same invisibility, the same daily negotiations of identity and respect. They didn't need words. We all understood. I smiled at them, not triumphantly, not smugly, but with a quiet, resolute promise. This isn't over. And they knew it. By the time I walked out of that office, the sun dipping low behind the skyscrapers, I felt a weight lift, replaced by something far heavier and far more powerful. Clarity. They had tried to erase me, but they had only sharpened my focus. They had taken my role, but not my agency. They had stripped my title, but not my strategy. And as I walked into the streets of Atlanta, the city buzzing, alive, oblivious, I knew that the next moves, precise, calculated, unyielding, would make them reconsider everything they thought they controlled. Because I was no longer just the smiling face on the poster. I was Brianna Cole, strategist, survivor, voice of a community too long silenced, and I was just getting started. I didn't go home that night. Not really. I walked out of the office building into the crisp Atlanta air, my heels clicking against the concrete, but my mind wasn't on the streets, on dinner, on anything mundane. My mind was on the hollow eyes of HR, the polite but empty nods of executives, the smiling poster on the wall that had celebrated me for months while stripping away everything I had built. I knew what I had to do. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in clarity, in truth. I found myself in a small, quiet cafe, laptop open, coffee steaming beside me, and I began cataloging every slight, every ignored proposal, every whispered dismissal. The campaign images, the billboards, the smiling corporate newsletter faces, all carefully curated optics. None of it real. And I realized they hadn't just dismissed me. They had dismissed everyone who looked like me, everyone who understood that diversity wasn't a photo opportunity, but a commitment. I pulled up the company website, noting the CMS login I still had access to, a remnant of trust they hadn't thought to revoke. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I was thinking about justice, accountability, exposure. Every decision, every line of code, every click would be precise, deliberate. I had spent years learning to survive in environments that undervalued me. Now, I would use that knowledge to make them confront their own falsehoods. I sipped my coffee and remembered all the micro moments I had endured. The white colleagues taking credit for ideas I had painstakingly researched, the junior black employees lowering their voices around me, the endless "let's circle back" comments that meant, "you will be ignored." Those small indignities had taught me patience, strategy, and timing. And tonight, all of that would become my advantage. The cafe emptied as the clock ticked past midnight. Outside, the streets were quiet, lit by the orange glow of street lamps reflecting off rain-slicked sidewalks. I opened a new document, drafting the words I would later embed on their website. Short, clear, irrefutable. Not an insult, not a threat, just truth. Diversity is not a photo. It's a promise. I typed it slowly, letting each word echo in the empty cafe. I read it aloud, voice low, steady, commanding. Yes, this was the message. I paused and thought of my community, mentors who had guided me through years of systemic dismissal, colleagues who had shared their own struggles silently, friends who had whispered, "You are the one who will break the silence." I wasn't alone, and that was the most powerful realization of all. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had been unseen, unheard, uncelebrated while their likenesses were used as trophies. Hours passed. Coffee cups stacked. Fingers danced over keys as I planned every step. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't chaotic. Every action was deliberate. I traced the path I would take, every security check, every backup, every precaution. I had learned to anticipate, to move quietly, to act decisively when the world expected silence. And now, in the quiet hum of my cafe cocoon, I was ready. The clock struck 3. Rain began to patter against the windows, a steady rhythm that matched the pulse in my chest. I leaned back, eyes scanning the glowing skyline outside, thinking of the executives who had smiled at me in meetings while erasing my contributions. They would wake tomorrow to a truth they couldn't ignore. They would see that smiling for a brochure does not absolve a company from accountability. That token images are not diversity. And I, Brianna Cole, would be the one to make them see it. I thought of the young Black women and men I had mentored, those starting their careers in offices that would see them as symbols, but not people. I thought of my friends who had been told, over and over, that speaking up would be unprofessional, that patience is a virtue. Tonight, patience had reached its limit. Tonight, strategy would prevail. Tonight, their optics would face reality. I spent hours rehearsing in my head, testing the sequence, envisioning each outcome. What if it failed? What if I was caught too soon? My heart raced, but I controlled it. I had rehearsed more than just this act. I had rehearsed myself. Every emotion, every hesitation, every doubt was cataloged and stored. I would not panic. I would not stumble. I would act with precision, like I had trained my whole life to do, navigating spaces that had never fully welcomed me. Dawn crept over the horizon, painting the cafe windows with pale orange light. I hadn't slept. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't allowed myself distraction. My plan was ready. The words were ready. The action, precise, controlled, inevitable. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over me. This was not chaos. This was clarity. This was power. This was justice served with intelligence, patience, and precision. By sunrise, I packed up my things, leaving a tip for the barista who hadn't questioned my midnight vigil. Outside, the city stirred, oblivious to the storm about to land within the polished walls of a corporate high-rise. I walked with deliberate steps, heels clicking, laptop in hand, shoulders squared. I wasn't just walking back into an office. I was stepping into history, into a moment where my voice, my image, and my truth would finally align. And in that alignment, I felt something rare and intoxicating. Control. Not over others, not over their opinions, not over their false narratives, but control over my story, my action, my voice, my community. I smiled then, faintly, because tonight, the hollow image of diversity would meet the weight of real accountability, and they wouldn't be able to look away. You won't believe what happens next. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. 7 Nows woke up the next morning before the sun even dared to touch the skyscrapers. My apartment was silent, the hum of the city below barely reaching me, but I could feel the pulse of anticipation thrumming through my veins. Last night had been long, meticulous, deliberate. I had planted the message where the world couldn't ignore it. Their polished, smiling brochure face would now meet an unfiltered truth. I didn't laugh. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at my screen, knowing that once the clock struck 9, the company would see exactly what I had seen for months. That diversity is not a photo, it's a promise. As expected, by mid-morning, my inbox exploded. Notifications flooded in. Colleagues, former peers, even strangers tagging me in posts. Screenshots of the homepage replaced with my words, bold, undeniable, were shared across LinkedIn, Twitter, even Reddit. Diversity is not a photo. It's a promise. The words echoed, resonated, spread. People were shocked, amazed, inspired. And slowly, I began reading the comments. Hundreds, thousands, millions of Black professionals sharing stories they had never dared tell publicly. I've been tokenized. I've been unseen. Thank you for saying it out loud. 7s. I felt a surge of connection, a tangible solidarity. It was no longer just about me. Every click, every share, every comment reinforced the truth we'd all lived. They could no longer deny it. The optics of diversity had collided with reality, and reality had the upper hand. By late morning, the company was in chaos. HR emails started piling in, urgent internal meetings scheduled. The executives who had dismissed me, who had smiled politely while stripping away my contributions, were now facing a storm they couldn't control. Their screens flooded with media coverage, their LinkedIn notifications blowing up, journalists calling. And through it all, I remained calm. I had planned this with precision. Every step, every pause, every word of my message had been calculated to maximize impact without crossing into reckless territory. I wasn't here to destroy. I was here to expose. I scrolled through the feed, watching video reactions pop up. A young Black woman in Chicago posted a 30-second clip saying, "This is exactly what I've felt every day. Thank you, Brianna. You see us." A mentor from my old network in New York shared a story of systemic erasure at his firm. Comments flooded in. Emojis, applause, tears, exclamations. And I realized something profound. This was not just viral. This was movement in its earliest form. In the office, the ripple effects were immediate. Employees who had previously shrugged at diversity campaigns began whispering, questioning, noticing. Executives tried damage control, but the narrative had shifted. People were talking about real change, not marketing. And for the first time, I felt a sense of power that wasn't derived from title or authority, but from truth, courage, and strategy. I received a direct message from a junior colleague, a young Black woman who had been hesitant to speak up for fear of repercussions. She wrote, "I've been wanting to tell someone my story for years. I feel seen today." My chest tightened. This was why I had done it. Not for revenge, not for ego, for visibility, for agency, for every person who had been pushed to the background, silenced, overlooked. By noon, major publications picked it up. Headlines read, "Corporate Diversity Campaign Exposed by Former PR Manager. When a poster face becomes a voice, Brianna Cole demands more than smiles." The narrative had escaped the company's control. The world was watching. And through it all, I remained deliberate, strategic. Every word I had placed, every action I had taken, was carefully measured. They had underestimated me, and now the underestimation was public, undeniable, viral. Even the executives began to reach out, cautiously, through intermediaries. They offered apologies, requests for dialogue, attempts at mitigation. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to see how they would navigate a truth they had always ignored, how they would reconcile their performative statements with the reality I had laid bare. And as I scrolled through the thousands of supportive messages, I understood the real impact. My act had inspired others to question, to speak, to demand accountability. The ripples were unstoppable. Then came the unexpected. Invitations. Calls from organizations wanting to consult on DEI initiatives, requests for speaking engagements, panels, webinars. Suddenly, the Black professionals I had mentored, the young women who had whispered encouragement, the colleagues who had silently supported me, we had a platform, a network, a voice. And it was all because I had taken control when they tried to erase me. By late afternoon, my phone rang constantly. Messages piled up. I watched video reactions, read comments, responded selectively, maintaining composure. I wasn't basking in attention. I was observing, learning, steering the conversation. My strategy had always been deliberate, precise. And now, the real-time feedback loop of social media amplified its effect. I felt empowered, yes, but also responsible. Responsibility to my community, to those who had been unseen, unheard. As evening approached, I stepped out onto my balcony, city lights stretching endlessly. I reflected on the sequence of events, the campaign images, the ignored proposals, the dismissal, the late-night planning, the careful execution. Every piece had led here, and every piece had been under my control. I allowed myself a small, private smile, not of vanity, not of triumph over the company, but of affirmation. Strategy, patience, intelligence, and courage could disrupt even the most entrenched systems. That night, I drafted a short post for LinkedIn, careful but firm. Diversity is not a photo. It's a promise. Let's start keeping it. Within minutes, notifications pinged, responses poured in, and the post was shared thousands of times. I leaned back, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of connection, the breadth of impact. This was what change felt like, deliberate, tangible, empowering. And I knew, without doubt, that the next chapter would escalate even further, because the world had finally seen what I had seen all along. And once they saw it, there was no turning back. The moment came sooner than I had expected. By mid-morning, the office was buzzing with tension, like a hive disturbed. HR, executives, PR, all of them, moving frantically, their polished smiles gone, replaced by controlled panic. They had seen the fallout. The website, the posts, the viral messages, the comments. Everything I had calculated to expose them now raged like wildfire across social media. And there I was, calm, deliberate, standing on my own terms. I walked into the lobby, heels clicking against the marble floor, carrying my laptop and a small stack of notes. My eyes met those of the VP, Matthew. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His perfectly ironed suit did nothing to conceal the unease in his eyes. Around him, a circle of executives whispered frantically, phone screens in hand, hashtags trending, journalists calling. I didn't speak. I let the tension build. Every second stretched, like an elastic ready to snap. Finally, he spoke, voice tight, forced calm. "Brianna, we need to discuss this situation. Your actions on the website." I cut him off, voice steady, unwavering. "Actions? Matthew, what you call actions, I call truth. I didn't break anything. I exposed reality. I reminded the world that diversity is not a marketing photo. It's a promise you've repeatedly failed to keep." My words hung in the air like smoke, sharp, precise, undeniable. He blinked, visibly flustered. "Brianna, this is a serious matter. There are protocols, legal implications." I smiled faintly. "Protocol?" I followed every rule. "Policy?" I acted within the boundaries of access you trusted me with. And legality? I never touched what wasn't mine. The only thing you fear is being seen as the company you pretend to be, not the one you are. "Sevens!" The room went quiet. My voice echoed in the marble lobby, yet there was no malice, only clarity. That clarity hit harder than anger ever could. They wanted optics. They wanted compliance. They wanted silence. I gave them transparency. I gave them confrontation. I gave them truth they couldn't spin away. Meanwhile, around me, colleagues watched from a safe distance. Young Black employees, interns, peers who had endured microaggressions silently. They stared at me with wide eyes. Not fear, not doubt, respect, recognition. And then, slowly, subtle nods, whispered acknowledgments. They knew I had just carved space for them, too. Space to speak, space to be seen, space to demand reality. Matthew, still flustered, tried another approach. "Brianna, this could have consequences." I leaned forward slightly, voice still calm, but sharper. "The only consequence you didn't anticipate is accountability. The world is watching. Employees, communities, the media. And unlike you, I can handle being watched. I can handle scrutiny. I can handle exposure. Can you?" "Sevens." His mouth opened, then closed again. Words failed him. They always did when truth collided with privilege. Around him, the executives whispered among themselves, attempting damage control. I watched it unravel, meticulous, deliberate, precise. Every reaction was proof that my strategy had worked. Exposure without chaos, confrontation without aggression, empowerment without compromise. Then came the messages: LinkedIn, Twitter, DMs from colleagues, friends, even strangers who had been following the story. "Thank you. We see you." Finally, someone said it out loud. Each ping, each notification reinforced the weight of what I had done. Not just for me. Not just for visibility. For everyone who had been silenced, ignored, diminished. I realized that my actions were no longer just a statement. They were a beacon. By afternoon, media teams had arrived at the building. Cameras, lights, microphones. The spectacle was unavoidable. Matthew and HR tried to contain it, to spin it, to issue apologies and explanations. I walked past them, notebook in hand, laptop secured, heels echoing in the corridors. Every step deliberate, every glance measured. I didn't need to speak to them. My presence, my poise, my calm authority said more than words ever could. I entered the conference room, now swarming with journalists. Flashbulbs, lenses, questions hurled rapidly. I breathed, steady, calm. "Good afternoon," I said. And then I told the story. All of it. My contributions, the ignored proposals, the mentoring programs shelved, the daily microaggressions, the performative smiles. I told the story not with bitterness, but with honesty, clarity, and strength. And as I spoke, I saw something remarkable. Faces in the room shifted. Executives squirmed. Journalists leaned in. Colleagues nodded. The truth was contagious. I wrapped up my statement with the line I had rehearsed countless times. Diversity is not a photo. It's a promise. And it's time we started keeping it. Silence followed, then murmurs, applause. Not the polite claps of the office meetings I had endured. Real acknowledgement. Real recognition. Real power. Later that evening, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the day's events. The company would recover, of course. They would issue statements, attempt PR damage control, perhaps even implement real programs to save face. But I had already moved beyond that. My victory wasn't temporary. It was enduring. I had exposed the gap between optics and reality. I had reclaimed my agency. I had inspired a movement, ignited dialogue, and created accountability that could not be ignored. And as I looked out over the city skyline, the lights shimmering like a constellation of possibilities, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Not for fame, not for recognition, but for truth spoken, justice enacted, and empowerment shared. Brianna Cole was no longer just a smiling face on a brochure. She was a strategist, a voice, a force. And the world had finally seen her as she truly was. If you've ever been overlooked or underpaid, this part's for you. And if you feel that, hit that. Sevens. I've walked through this journey carrying more than just my ambitions. I carried the stories of everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, and minimized. Every microaggression, every polite dismissal, every "let's circle back next quarter" that never happened, I carried it, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. A responsibility to speak, to act, to show that visibility is not enough. Action matters. Looking back now, after the dust has settled and the world has seen, I realize the most important lesson. Authenticity is the cornerstone of power. You cannot be a symbol and remain silent. You cannot allow your likeness to be celebrated while your voice is erased. True influence comes from aligning your image, your voice, and your actions, no matter the cost, no matter the fear, no matter the odds stacked against you. For our community, especially for Black professionals in corporate spaces, this is critical. We are often asked to smile for photos, represent inclusion, be the poster face for programs that may never exist. And in those moments, it's easy to accept visibility as progress. But we know better. We know that representation without recognition is hollow, and that empowerment without action is temporary. We are not here to be symbols. We are here to transform spaces, to demand accountability, to create opportunities for ourselves and those who follow. Courage isn't loud. Courage isn't reckless. Courage is deliberate, informed, strategic, and resilient. It is the patience to plan, the intelligence to observe, and the strength to act when the moment arrives. That is what I embraced. And in embracing it, I realized something profound. Our stories, our voices, our lived experiences, these are our most powerful tools. They cannot be erased. They cannot be silenced. And when wielded with clarity and conviction, they can move entire institutions, entire industries, even the world. I hope young Black women and men watching, listening, reading these words understand this. Your value is not defined by the smiles executives plaster on brochures. Your worth is not determined by whether they allow you into the boardroom. Your power comes from your ability to claim space, demand truth, and act on your convictions. Every subtle insult, every microaggression, every dismissal, use it to sharpen your strategy, focus your actions, and reinforce your resolve. You are not alone. You are seen. You are heard. And your voice matters. The world may celebrate optics. It may reward smiles, curated images, and performative diversity campaigns, but you and I, and those who come after us, we know that change comes from courage aligned with action, from voices amplified by truth, from persistence rooted in integrity. If we do not act, the narrative will be controlled by those who seek to exploit our presence rather than honor our contribution. If we act deliberately, strategically, and with purpose, we can rewrite the rules. As I look back on everything, the dismissal, the late nights, the meticulous planning, the exposure, the viral moment, I realize that the real victory isn't the headlines or the media attention. The real victory is the empowerment of our community, the reclaiming of our narrative, and the demonstration that we will no longer settle for empty words. I am Brianna Cole. I was once a smiling face on a brochure. Now I am a voice that cannot be silenced. And through my story, I hope others understand that truth. Courage and strategic action will always outweigh hollow recognition. That is the legacy I aim to leave. A blueprint for visibility that transforms into accountability, a reminder that our lives, our contributions, and our voices are not negotiable. So, to every young Black professional sitting quietly in a meeting, wondering if anyone sees you, if anyone values you, they do. You are seen. You are valued. And when you claim your voice, the world will finally have to listen. Your work, your integrity, your persistence, they matter more than any brochure ever could. And that, in the end, is the promise of true diversity. Not the image, not the marketing, the commitment to visibility, voice and action, real, lasting, and unyielding. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this story. If it spoke to you, hit subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us who we are.